A millionaire found a blind girl abandoned on the street and took care of her for 10 years. One day, when he arrived home earlier than usual, the millionaire could not believe what his wife was doing to the girl. The rain pounded mercilessly against the windows of the luxurious Manhattan townhouse as Sarah Bennett clutched her newborn baby to her chest. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she stuffed a few essentials into a designer bag, her eyes avoiding the infant's face. "Sarah, please don't do this," Richard's voice echoed from the hallway, desperate and broken. "She's our daughter." Sarah's lip curled in disgust as she looked down at the baby. "Our daughter. This isn't what I wanted." "She's blind, Richard, blind." "Do you understand what that means?" The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah quickly covered her mouth, silencing the cry. Thunder crashed outside, illuminating her tear-streaked face, not tears of love or compassion, but of rage and disappointment. Richard burst into the room, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his eyes red from crying. "Grace needs us, Sarah," the doctor said with proper care and support. "I don't care what they said," Sarah spat, backing away from him. "I won't spend my life taking care of a defective child. I had dreams, Richard, dreams that didn't include this." She gestured wildly at the baby, who began to cry in earnest now. The sound seemed to fuel Sarah's desperation. In one fluid motion, she pushed past Richard and ran down the stairs, her expensive heels clicking against the marble floor. "Sarah, stop." "Please," Richard's footsteps thundered behind her. But Sarah was already out the door, the rain soaking through her silk blouse. She ran through the dark streets of Upper East Side, her arms tight around the crying bundle. The baby's wails mixed with the howling wind as Sarah's determination grew with each step. She knew exactly where she was going. The orphanage on 82nd Street. She'd seen it many times during her charity committee meetings. How ironic that she'd once helped raise funds for the place that would now take her burden. At the orphanage steps, Sarah hesitated for just a moment. The baby had grown quiet, her tiny hand wrapping around Sarah's finger. For a split second, something cracked in Sarah's heart, but she quickly hardened it again. "You'll be better off without me," she whispered, placing the baby in the sheltered doorway. "And I'll be better off without you." With that, she rang the bell and disappeared into the stormy night, leaving behind a piece of paper with just one word: Grace. Sarah Bennett had always lived a life of privilege. Growing up in Manhattan's elite social circles, she was the daughter of a prominent surgeon and a socialite mother who ensured their only child wanted for nothing. Her childhood was filled with private ballet lessons, exclusive boarding schools, and summers in the Hamptons. This carefully curated existence shaped her into someone who valued perfection above all else. At 25, she married Richard Anderson, a brilliant young attorney from an equally prestigious family. Their wedding at the Plaza Hotel was featured in several society magazines, with Sarah wearing a custom-made gown that cost more than most people's annual salary. The couple seemed destined for the perfect life. Sarah had always envisioned charity galas, board positions, and eventually beautiful children who would carry on their legacy. However, Sarah's perfectly planned world began to crumble during her pregnancy. The first signs of trouble appeared during routine prenatal checks, but she dismissed them, convinced that her body, like everything else in her life, would perform flawlessly. When the doctors suggested additional tests, she became increasingly agitated, snapping at the medical staff and refusing to acknowledge their concerns. The delivery itself was traumatic for Sarah, not because of physical pain, but because of the growing realization that something was wrong. The room fell silent when Grace was born, and the doctors exchanged worried glances. The baby didn't focus on anything, her eyes moving aimlessly. The diagnosis of congenital blindness hit Sarah like a physical blow, shattering her dreams of maternal perfection. In the days following Grace's birth, Sarah's behavior became increasingly erratic. She refused to hold the baby, turning away whenever the nurses brought her in. During mandatory consultations with specialists about Grace's care, Sarah sat rigid and unresponsive, her designer handbag clutched like a shield across her chest. The doctor's words about special schools, support systems, and adaptive technologies fell on deaf ears. When her wealthy friends came to visit, Sarah kept the baby hidden away, making excuses about Grace being asleep or with the nurses. She couldn't bear the thought of their pitying looks or whispered conversations at charity events. The shame of having a defective child, as she called it, consumed her every thought. Her own mother's reaction only reinforced Sarah's disgust. "Darling, there are places for children like this," her mother had whispered during an afternoon tea, sliding a discreet business card across the table. "No one would have to know. You could try again, have a normal child." These words festered in Sarah's mind, growing stronger with each passing day. She began researching private institutions and adoption agencies, all while avoiding the nursery where Richard spent hours with their daughter. His dedication to Grace only heightened Sarah's resentment. She watched with mounting disgust as he learned to care for their blind child, his love for Grace making Sarah feel increasingly inadequate and angry. The breaking point came during a dinner party at their home when one of Sarah's closest friends brought her own newborn daughter. The baby's bright eyes focused on her mother's face, tracking movement and responding to smiles. Sarah excused herself from the table and spent an hour in her bathroom, staring at her reflection and making a decision that would haunt multiple lives for years to come. That very night she began planning her escape from what she saw as a lifetime of burden and shame. In her warped perspective, she was doing everyone a favor: herself, society, and even the child who would never meet her impossible standards. The storm that would accompany her abandonment of Grace seemed a fitting backdrop to the darkness in her heart. Richard Anderson's world collapsed the night Sarah disappeared with Grace. Standing in the rain, screaming his daughter's name into the darkness, he felt a part of his soul being torn away. As a successful attorney who had never lost a case, the inability to protect his own child crushed him with a weight heavier than any legal burden he'd ever carried. The first few days after Grace's disappearance were a blur of police reports and desperate searches. Richard used every connection he had, hired private investigators, and plastered the city with posters. His law firm partners watched with growing concern as their brilliant colleague began showing up to work disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted look that never quite faded. At night he would sit in Grace's untouched nursery, holding the small stuffed rabbit he'd bought her the day she was born. The room remained exactly as it had been: the carefully chosen pale yellow walls, the hand-painted butterflies, the antique rocking chair where he dreamed of singing his daughter to sleep. Each item was a reminder of the future that had been stolen from him. Richard's search for Grace consumed him. He spent weekends visiting orphanages, children's homes, and adoption agencies across the state. His once promising legal career began to suffer as he took on fewer cases, dedicating more time to finding his daughter. The partners at his firm suggested he take a leave of absence, concerned about his increasing obsession. The breaking point came during a high-profile court case when Richard thought he spotted Sarah in the courthouse. He abandoned his closing arguments mid-sentence, running through the halls only to find a stranger who barely resembled his ex-wife. The incident cost him his position at the firm, but Richard hardly noticed. In his mind, losing his career was nothing compared to losing Grace. Years passed, and Richard's search continued. He moved to a smaller apartment, using most of his savings to fund his ongoing investigation. He became a regular face at police stations, hospitals, and social services offices. Some officers knew him by name, greeting him with a mix of pity and respect as he checked yet again for any news about Grace. Every birthday that passed without his daughter felt like another failure. He kept a box of carefully wrapped presents each year, adding another gift for the little girl he couldn't find. Books with raised letters, specially designed toys, clothing in increasing sizes, all waiting for a reunion he refused to stop believing in. Richard's parents urged him to move on, to rebuild his life and perhaps find love again. But how could he explain that every time he saw a little girl holding her father's hand, his heart shattered anew? How could he describe the pain of walking past playground and hearing children's laughter, knowing his daughter might be somewhere struggling without his protection and love? He took cases representing families with disabled children, working pro bono to ensure other parents wouldn't lose their kids due to prejudice or lack of resources. His new small practice became known as a haven for families facing similar challenges to what he and Grace should have faced together. Each case felt like a small way of honoring his lost daughter, of fighting the system that had somehow failed them both. Even as the years turned his hair grey and lined his face with worry, Richard never gave up hope. He kept Grace's photo on his desk, age progressed by experts every few years. Sometimes late at night he would trace her features with his finger, wondering if she had his smile or Sarah's nose, if she was safe, if she knew somewhere deep inside that her father was still searching for her. Michael Elias stood at the window of his penthouse office, overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a successful investment firm, multiple properties worldwide, and a reputation as one of Wall Street's most brilliant minds. Yet the emptiness of his massive home echoed the void in his heart. His marriage to Catherine, a renowned art curator, was a union of convenience rather than love. They lived separate lives under the same roof, their interactions limited to charity events and social obligations where they played the part of the perfect power couple. Catherine spent most of her time traveling between galleries, while Michael buried himself in work, each finding solace in their respective escapes. The loss of their own child years ago had created an irreparable rift between them. Catherine had thrown herself into her career, becoming increasingly cold and distant, while Michael found himself drawn to children's charities, secretly hoping to fill the hole in his life. His donations to orphanages and children's hospitals were well known in philanthropic circles, though few understood the personal pain driving his generosity. At charity events, Michael often found himself watching families with a mixture of envy and longing. He would observe fathers playing with their children in Central Park during his morning runs, their laughter making his massive fortune seem worthless in comparison. His executive assistant had learned not to schedule meetings on the anniversary of his lost child, knowing he would spend the day in his private study, looking through old photographs and what might have been ultrasound images. The mansion he shared with Catherine was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featured in design magazines and admired by their social circle. Yet its pristine rooms and carefully curated art collections felt more like a museum than a home. The wing that had been designated as a nursery remained locked, untouched since the day their hopes had been shattered. Catherine's response to their loss had been to eliminate all traces of childhood from their lives. She had banned family photos from their social events, refused to attend gatherings where children might be present, and treated any mention of their past with icy disdain. Her focus on maintaining their perfect social image had turned their marriage into a carefully choreographed performance. Despite his wealth and success, Michael found himself increasingly drawn to the simple moments he observed in others' lives. He would sometimes take detours through residential neighborhoods, slowing his chauffeur-driven car to watch children playing on sidewalks or families sharing meals through lit windows. These glimpses of genuine human connection made his own existence feel hollow by comparison. His employees whispered about his habit of personally handling the firm's charitable foundation, something usually delegated to junior staff. They didn't understand why one of New York's most powerful financiers would spend hours reviewing applications from struggling families and small community organizations. For Michael, each approval was a small attempt at healing, a way of creating the family connections he couldn't find in his own life. As he stood in his office that evening, watching the city lights flicker on, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His success story, celebrated in business magazines and envied by competitors, felt incomplete. The pristine halls of his mansion, the perfectly maintained gardens, the staff that anticipated his every need, none of it could fill the fundamental emptiness of a home without love, without the sound of children's laughter, without real family bonds. Little did he know that fate was about to present him with an unexpected opportunity to change not only his life but the lives of others in ways he could never have imagined. The St. Mary's Home for Children stood like a grey fortress on 82nd Street, its Victorian architecture masking the daily struggles within its walls. For young Emily, known to the staff only as the blind girl, each day was a battle for survival. At 10 years old, she had learned to navigate not just her physical blindness, but the emotional darkness of abandonment and cruelty. The mornings began with chaos in the dormitory, where other children deliberately moved her belongings, laughing as she stumbled around searching for her clothes. "Oops, sorry blind girl, didn't see you there," they would taunt, a cruel joke that never seemed to get old. Emily learned to sleep fully dressed, clutching her few possessions close to her chest. Mealtimes were particularly challenging. The cafeteria staff, overworked and underpaid, had little patience for a child who needed extra help. Emily would often sit alone, trying to locate her food with trembling fingers while other children stole from her plate. "She won't notice anyway," they would whisper, their giggles cutting through the noisy dining hall. Miss Preston, the head caretaker, treated Emily's blindness as an inconvenience rather than a disability requiring support. "We don't have resources for special treatment," she would snap whenever Emily requested help. The woman's heels would click sharply against the floor as she walked away, leaving Emily to figure things out on her own. Education was another source of daily humiliation. While other children attended regular classes, Emily was left in a corner with outdated Braille books, most of them damaged or incomplete. Her natural intelligence and eagerness to learn were treated as annoyances. "What's the point?" one teacher remarked within Emily's earshot. "It's not like she'll ever amount to anything." The worst moments came during visitor days when prospective parents toured the orphanage. Emily would sit straight-backed on her bed, wearing her cleanest dress, hoping against hope that someone might see past her disability. But she could hear the whispers, "Poor thing, such a shame," but it would be so much work. Each rejection carved deeper wounds in her young heart. One particular incident stood out in Emily's memory. During a rainy afternoon, she had found her way to the orphanage's old piano, drawn by its sound when other children played random notes. Her fingers had barely touched the keys when Miss Preston yanked her away. "Don't touch that. You'll only break it," she had scolded. That night, Emily cried silently in her bed, her fingers moving through the air, playing invisible melodies. Winter brought its own challenges. The orphanage's heating system was unreliable, and Emily's bed was placed near a drafty window. Other children received donated coats and warm clothing, but Emily often found herself with ill-fitting garments or items too worn to keep out the cold. "Beggars can't be choosers," was Miss Preston's standard response to any complaints. The only kindness came from Maria, an elderly cleaning woman who would sometimes sneak Emily extra blankets or saved food from the kitchen. "My pequeña valiente," she would whisper, quickly patting Emily's hand before shuffling away. But Maria worked only 3 days a week, leaving Emily to face the remaining time alone. At night, when the dormitory fell silent except for the soft breathing of sleeping children, Emily would often sit by her window. She couldn't see the stars, but she could feel the cool glass against her forehead and imagine a different life. Sometimes she would hear cars passing on the street below and create stories about where they might be going, dreaming of someone coming to take her away from St. Mary's. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the daily challenges of navigating without sight. It was the profound loneliness, the feeling of being fundamentally unwanted. Emily had overheard enough conversations to know that her birth mother had left her at the orphanage, but no one would tell her why. This knowledge sat like a stone in her heart, growing heavier with each passing year. Despite everything, Emily developed an extraordinary resilience. She learned to use her other senses to survive recognizing people by their footsteps, knowing which floorboards creaked, memorizing the daily routines that kept her safe from the worst bullying. But each night, as she hugged herself to sleep, she couldn't help wondering if somewhere someone might be missing her. The night Emily decided to escape from St. Mary's was unusually cold for September. She had spent weeks memorizing the night guard's routine, counting steps between creaky floorboards and hoarding small pieces of bread in her pillowcase. The final straw came when Miss Preston announced plans to send her to a special institution, her tone making it clear this wasn't good news. Under cover of darkness, Emily slipped from her bed, already dressed in layers of worn clothing. Her fingers traced the familiar wall, counting doors until she reached the storage room with its broken window, her planned escape route. The night guard's snores echoed from his usual post as Emily carefully pushed herself through the narrow opening, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake the entire building. The first taste of freedom was terrifying. The city streets, which had always seemed alive with possibility in her dreams, now overwhelmed her senses. Cars honked, people brushed past without noticing her, and unfamiliar smells assaulted her nose. Using her makeshift cane, a broken broom handle she'd stolen from the orphanage, Emily began walking, one tentative step at a time. Those first few nights, she slept in cardboard boxes behind restaurants, the smell of discarded food both tempting and nauseating. Her blindness, already a challenge, became an even greater obstacle on the streets. Simple tasks like finding food or a safe place to rest required incredible courage and resourcefulness. She learned to follow the warmth of sunlight, to recognize the smell of bakeries in the morning, to listen for the kindness in people's voices. But kindness was rare. Restaurant owners shooed her away from their dumpsters, pedestrians avoided her outstretched hand, and other homeless people viewed her as competition for limited resources. Once she found a relatively safe spot near a church, only to be chased away by the custodian who feared she would scare away the congregation. Emily quickly learned that being blind and homeless made her uniquely vulnerable. She developed a system of hiding during the day and moving at night when the streets were quieter and easier to navigate. She memorized the locations of public bathrooms, drinking fountains, and spots where kind-hearted vendors might accidentally drop day-old bread or fruit. The worst part was the rain. Without sight to guide her to shelter, Emily would often end up soaked to the bone, huddled in doorways until building owners inevitably drove her away. Her clothes, already inadequate, rarely dried completely in the autumn chill. She began to understand why the older homeless people she met spoke of winter with such fear. One particularly difficult evening, Emily attempted to beg near a restaurant entrance. A woman stopped, and for a moment Emily felt hope rise in her chest. But then came the words that would haunt her. "Oh, sweetheart, you're blind? Maybe you should go back to wherever you came from." Surely someone must be missing you. Emily wanted to scream that no one was missing her, that where she came from was worse than the streets, but she remained silent as the woman's heels clicked away. Hunger became a constant companion, sharper and more demanding than any she'd known at the orphanage. She learned to judge the freshness of discarded food by smell and touch, though it often made her sick. Some nights she would press her hands against her stomach, trying to quiet its growling enough to sleep. The city sounds became her map. Emily learned that the morning bread truck meant the bakery 3 blocks down was opening. The sound of children's voices meant school was letting out, and she should move away from that area. The quiet hum of early morning meant it was safe to search for food in restaurant dumpsters before the day's staff arrived. Despite the hardships, Emily found small moments of peace. Sometimes late at night she would find quiet spots where she could hear music drifting from apartment windows. Her fingers would move in time with the melodies, playing imaginary piano keys on her knees. These moments reminded her that beauty still existed, even in her darkened world. As autumn deepened and temperatures dropped, Emily's situation became increasingly desperate. Her cough worsened, her clothes grew thinner, and finding safe places to sleep became harder. She began to wonder if survival on the streets was possible for someone like her. Yet the thought of returning to St. Mary's, to Miss Preston's cruelty and the other children's torment, was even more frightening than freezing or starving. She couldn't know that fate was about to intervene in the form of a chance encounter that would change her life forever. The evening Michael Elias found Emily was unusually cold for early autumn. He had stayed late at his office, reviewing charitable foundation applications, when a sudden urge for fresh air drove him to dismiss his driver and walk home. The streets of Upper Manhattan were quieter than usual, with most people already hurried home to escape the biting wind. He almost missed her, a small figure huddled in the doorway of his recently acquired building, a failed restaurant he planned to renovate. Emily sat with her knees drawn to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. What caught Michael's attention wasn't her presence, but the delicate movement of her fingers in the air, as if playing an invisible instrument. "Are you all right?" he asked, stopping a few feet away. Emily startled at his voice, pressing herself further into the doorway. Michael noticed her unseeing eyes, the way they moved without focusing, and the makeshift cane beside her. His heart clenched as he realized this child was blind and alone on the streets. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I'll leave if you want me to." She began gathering her meager possessions, a tattered backpack and the broken broom handle she used as a cane. Michael stepped closer, careful to keep his voice gentle. "You don't have to leave. Are you hungry?" He watched as Emily hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of trusting a stranger against her obvious hunger. Her thin frame and dirty clothes told a story of prolonged hardship. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked, her voice carrying a wisdom and wariness beyond her years. Everyone wants something in return. The statement, coming from one so young, hit Michael like a physical blow. "Sometimes," he replied carefully, "people help because it's the right thing to do. Would you join me for dinner? There's a diner around the corner that makes excellent soup." He waited patiently as Emily considered his offer, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her worn sweater. Finally, hunger won over caution. Emily stood shakily, using the wall for support. Michael resisted the urge to help her, understanding that trust needed to be earned. Instead, he described their surroundings as they walked, warning her about curbs and obstacles. At the diner, the late-night waitress raised her eyebrows at the odd pair, the impeccably dressed businessman and the dirty, clearly homeless child. Michael ordered hot soup, sandwiches, and hot chocolate, watching as Emily carefully felt for the spoon and bowl, her movements precise despite her blindness. As she ate, her story emerged in fragments. The orphanage, the escape, the weeks on the street, each detail making Michael's heart heavier. He recognized in her the same loneliness he carried, the desperate need for connection masked by careful self-protection. "What were you playing?" he asked, remembering her finger movements in the doorway. Emily froze mid-bite, embarrassed. "I wasn't really playing," she admitted. I hear music sometimes in my head. I imagine what it would be like to play it." That moment of vulnerability decided Michael's next action. "I have a piano," he said quietly. "A beautiful grand piano that no one ever plays. Would you like to try it?" The hope that flashed across Emily's face was quickly replaced by suspicion. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked again, her hands clutching the empty soup bowl. "Nobody's nice without a reason." Michael leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "Because 11 years ago I lost someone very precious to me, and maybe, just maybe, helping you might help heal both of us." After much gentle persuasion, Emily agreed to come to his home. The mansion's staff, accustomed to Michael's charitable impulses, quickly prepared a guest room. As Emily's fingers first touched the piano keys, producing a hesitant but surprisingly melodic sequence of notes, Michael felt something shift in his heart. That night, as he heard the shower running in the guest bathroom and saw the light under Emily's door, the empty mansion felt different, warmer somehow, more like the home it was meant to be. He knew Catherine would be furious when she returned from her gallery tour, but for the first time in years, Michael felt he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. He couldn't know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets and change multiple lives forever. Catherine Elias's return from her European gallery tour was marked by a scream that echoed through the mansion. Finding a blind child at her grand piano, touching the pristine keys with unwashed hands, was more than she could bear. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to make Emily flinch away from the instrument. Michael's attempts to explain were met with icy disdain. "A homeless child? Have you lost your mind? We're not running a charity shelter." Catherine's designer heels clicked menacingly across the marble floor as she circled Emily, examining her like an unwanted piece of furniture. From that moment, Catherine launched a subtle but relentless campaign to make Emily's life miserable. She would move furniture slightly, just enough to make Emily stumble during her careful navigation of the house. "Oh, I forgot you can't see," she would say, her voice dripping with false concern. "How inconvenient for everyone." During meals, Catherine would place Emily's water glass just out of reach, watching with cruel satisfaction as the girl's searching fingers knocked it over. "This is why we can't have nice things anymore," she would sigh loudly, ensuring the staff cleaned up while Emily sat mortified. The piano became a particular point of contention. Catherine would slam the lid shut when Emily was practicing, claiming the noise gave her migraines. "It's painful enough having to look at you," she muttered when she thought Michael wasn't within earshot. "Must I be forced to listen to your pathetic attempts at music as well?" She took special pleasure in describing things Emily couldn't see, emphasizing colors and visual beauty with exaggerated detail. "Oh, the sunset is simply magnificent today," she would announce at dinner. Such a shame some of us can't appreciate it. The cruel smile in her voice made her true meaning clear. When Emily received new clothes, her first proper wardrobe, Catherine made sure to criticize every item. "Michael, darling, why waste money on designer labels? It's not as if she can see how she looks. And who's going to look at her anyway?" Each word was calculated to chip away at Emily's self-esteem. The staff, who had grown fond of Emily, found themselves caught between Catherine's authority and their desire to help. Catherine would fire any servant she caught showing kindness to the girl, ensuring Emily remained isolated except for Michael's presence. One particularly cruel incident occurred when Catherine hosted a gallery event at the mansion. Instead of allowing Emily to stay in her room, Catherine insisted she attend, parading her before the guests like a curiosity. "Yes, Michael's latest project," she would say, her social smile never reaching her eyes. "We're all making such sacrifices to accommodate her. Special needs." Late at night, when Michael was working late, Catherine would stand in Emily's doorway, watching the girl prepare for bed. "You don't belong here," she would say softly, her voice like ice. "This isn't your fairy tale, and Michael isn't your knight in shining armor. Sooner or later, he'll realize what a burden you are." Emily learned to hide her tears, to swallow her fear, to move through the mansion like a ghost. She developed an uncanny ability to sense Catherine's presence, her body tensing at the specific sound of those designer heels on marble. But she refused to complain to Michael, knowing it would only create more tension in the household. Catherine's cruelty reached new heights when she discovered Emily's growing talent at the piano. The girl had a natural gift, her fingers finding melodies that brought tears to listeners' eyes. During one of Michael's business dinners, when the guests praised Emily's playing, Catherine accidentally spilled hot tea on Emily's hands. "How clumsy of me," she said sweetly as Emily bit back a cry of pain. "Perhaps this is a sign you should focus on more appropriate activities." The incident marked a turning point. Catherine began plotting something more sinister, something that would remove Emily from their lives permanently. As she watched the girl navigate the mansion halls, her mind worked on a plan that would ensure Emily's disappearance would look like an unfortunate accident. What Catherine didn't realize was that her calculated cruelty was building evidence of a truth she desperately wanted to keep hidden, a truth that would soon shatter the carefully constructed facade of her perfect life. The discovery of Emily's extraordinary musical gift came unexpectedly one quiet Sunday morning. Michael was in his study when he heard the first hesitant notes of Beethoven's Für Elise drifting from the music room. The melody, though simple, carried a haunting quality that made him pause his work and listen. Following the sound, he found Emily at the grand piano, her fingers moving with natural grace across the keys. She hadn't had a single lesson yet, but somehow she was reproducing a piece she'd only heard playing in the background during dinner parties. What struck Michael wasn't just her ability to play, but the deep emotion she brought to each note. "How did you learn that?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Emily's fingers stilled on the keys, her unseen eyes turning toward his voice. I just listen," she explained. "The music speaks to me. I can feel where the notes should go." Michael immediately hired M.S. Robertson, a renowned piano teacher known for working with gifted children. The elderly instructor was skeptical at first, but after one session with Emily, her attitude changed completely. "This child," she declared to Michael, "has perfect pitch and an extraordinary musical memory. She doesn't just play the notes, she feels the music in her soul." Under M.S. Robertson's guidance, Emily's talent flourished. She learned to read music in Braille, but her true gift was her ability to play by ear. She could hear a piece once and reproduce it with remarkable accuracy, adding her own subtle interpretations that brought new life to even the most familiar compositions. The piano became Emily's voice, her way of expressing the emotion she couldn't put into words. When Catherine was particularly cruel, Emily would pour her pain into Chopin's nocturnes. On happier days, her fingers would dance through Mozart's sonatas, filling the mansion with joy that even the staff couldn't help but stop and listen to. Michael found himself rearranging his schedule to be home for Emily's practice sessions. He would sit in the music room, paperwork forgotten, as she progressed from simple pieces to increasingly complex compositions. The way her face lit up when she mastered a difficult passage reminded him of the daughter he'd lost, bringing both pain and healing to his heart. During one memorable evening, Emily played an original composition she'd been secretly working on. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, weaving together themes of loneliness, hope, and resilience. When she finished, Michael realized he was crying. "That's your story, isn't it?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, her own tears falling silently on the keys. Word of Emily's talent began to spread through New York's musical circles. Other musicians would visit, amazed by the blind girl who could play their most challenging pieces after a single hearing. A renowned composer, visiting for dinner, declared her a once-in-a-generation talent. But with recognition came increased tension. Catherine's jealousy turned to barely contained rage when guests would ignore her carefully curated art collection to gather around the piano, listening to Emily play. The girl's gift was a reminder of something Catherine had lost or perhaps given up long ago. What no one knew was that Emily's musical ability wasn't just a random talent. It was an inherited gift, passed down through blood she shared with someone much closer than anyone suspected. Her playing style, the way she would tilt her head when concentrating, the natural grace of her hands, all were eerily familiar to those who had known Catherine in her younger years. As Emily's reputation grew, Michael began planning a small recital to showcase her talent. Catherine's objections were overruled, though her eyes held a dangerous gleam as she watched Emily prepare. The music that brought such joy to others was becoming a threat to the carefully constructed lies she'd built her life upon. Emily, unaware of the growing tension, continued to find solace in her music. Late at night, when she thought everyone was asleep, she would sneak down to the piano and play softly, her fingers telling stories of loss, love, and the desperate hope for belonging. These private concerts, heard only by the night and occasionally by Michael, revealed the depth of her soul and the pain she carried. The piano had become more than just an instrument. It was Emily's sanctuary, her confidant, and increasingly the key to unlocking secrets that had been buried for years. Lucas Bennett was Catherine's perfectly groomed 16-year-old son from her first marriage, attending an elite boarding school in Connecticut. His occasional visits home were carefully orchestrated affairs designed to showcase the ideal family life Catherine desperately maintained. However, during his spring break visit, something changed when he first heard Emily playing the piano. Standing in the doorway of the music room, Lucas was transfixed by the blind girl's performance of Chopin. There was something hauntingly familiar about her mannerisms, the way she swayed with the music, that stirred long-buried memories. Despite his mother's explicit instructions to avoid interaction with Michael's charity case, Lucas found himself drawn to Emily. His first act of rebellion was small, leaving a Braille music book on Emily's piano bench when Catherine was out. He'd spent hours researching online how to help a blind musician, ordering materials in secret using his trust fund allowance. Emily never knew who left the gifts, but her smile when discovering new music made Lucas's heart ache with an unfamiliar emotion. Late at night, Lucas would sometimes hear his mother's angry whispers through the walls, her cruel comments about Emily carrying clearly in the quiet mansion. He began leaving his bedroom door open, clearing his throat or making noise whenever Catherine approached Emily's room with harmful intentions. His presence became a silent shield, though Emily remained unaware of her protector. During family dinners, Lucas observed the dynamics with growing unease. He noticed how his mother would deliberately move Emily's water glass, the subtle ways she tried to humiliate the young girl. Something about his mother's focused cruelty seemed personal, beyond mere inconvenience or social embarrassment. One evening, while searching through old family albums in the attic, Lucas discovered a photograph that made his blood run cold. It showed a younger Catherine at a piano recital, her posture and expression mirror images of Emily's. The date on the photo coincided with his mother's mysterious European tour 11 years ago. Lucas began spending more time at home, fabricating excuses to leave school on weekends. He would secretly practice with Emily when both Michael and Catherine were out, teaching her pieces his mother had once played. The similarity in their musical interpretations was uncanny, though neither realized the significance. He started leaving anonymous notes for Michael, warning him about Catherine's more egregious acts of cruelty. When Catherine planned to sabotage Emily's upcoming recital by having the piano slightly detuned, Lucas arranged for the tuner to come early, claiming it was his mother's request. His protective instincts grew stronger as he noticed Emily's remarkable talent. It wasn't just her musical ability, it was her resilience, her quiet strength in the face of Catherine's constant psychological warfare. Lucas found himself wondering about his own past, about the gaps in family stories that had never quite made sense. During one particularly heated argument between Michael and Catherine about Emily's future, Lucas overheard something that confirmed his growing suspicions. Catherine's angry words she shouldn't even exist carried a weight that seemed to reference more than just Emily's presence in their home. Lucas began keeping a detailed diary of his observations and suspicions, storing it securely in his school dormitory. He also started recording Catherine's conversations when possible, sensing that someday this evidence might be crucial for Emily's protection. His own relationship with Catherine grew strained as he subtly challenged her treatment of Emily. "She's just a child," Mother he would say during their private conversations. Catherine's responses became increasingly defensive and erratic, her careful social mask cracking under her son's scrutiny. What troubled Lucas most was the growing recognition of his mother's dual nature, the perfectly poised socialite who championed children's art programs publicly while privately tormenting a blind child. The contradiction awakened questions about his own childhood, memories he'd suppressed of his mother's unexplained absences and emotional distance. As Emily's recital approached, Lucas's protective measures intensified. He arranged for several of his school friends' parents, influential members of New York society, to attend, knowing his mother wouldn't dare act against Emily with so many witnesses present. Yet he could see the dangerous glint in Catherine's eyes, the barely contained rage as Emily's talent drew increasing attention. Lucas knew he was playing a dangerous game. One wrong move could expose his involvement and remove his ability to protect Emily. But something deeper than mere compassion drove him, an instinct he couldn't yet name but would soon be forced to confront. As months passed in the Elias mansion, the relationship between Michael and Emily deepened into something neither had expected. Their mornings began with shared breakfasts where Michael would read the newspaper aloud, carefully selecting stories that would make Emily smile. He learned to describe everything in detail, from the way sunlight filtered through the windows to the changing colors of Central Park's trees visible from their breakfast nook. What started as simple acts of charity evolved into genuine paternal love. Michael found himself looking forward to their evening rituals, listening to Emily practice piano, helping her with Braille lessons, and sharing stories about their days. He discovered that Emily's blindness gave her a unique perspective on the world, one that helped him see beyond the superficial measures of success that had dominated his life. Their strongest bond formed through music. Michael, who had stopped playing piano after his own child's loss, began playing duets with Emily. Her natural talent inspired him to rediscover his passion, and their musical conversations became a language of their own. During these sessions, Emily would often rest her head against his shoulder, the gesture so natural and trusting it made his heart ache. "Tell me about colors," Emily asked one evening as they sat in the music room after practice. Michael took her small hands in his and thought carefully. "Blue feels like the keys of the piano under your fingers, cool, smooth, and full of possibility," he began. "Red sounds like the crescendo in your favorite Beethoven piece, passionate and alive." Through these conversations, he taught her to experience the world in new ways, while she taught him to see beauty in unexpected places. The transformation in Emily was remarkable. The frightened, malnourished child from the streets blossomed into a confident young musician. Michael ensured she received the best education possible, hiring specialized teachers and acquiring the latest technology to assist her learning. More importantly, he gave her the space to make mistakes, to learn, and to grow without fear of judgment. Their weekend routines became sacred. Every Saturday morning they would visit the local park where Michael would describe the scenes around them: children playing, dogs chasing balls, couples walking hand in hand. Emily would compose stories about the people she heard, her imagination bringing their world to life in ways that often left Michael amazed. One particularly meaningful moment came when Emily had a nightmare about her time on the streets. Instead of calling for help, she made her way to Michael's study, drawn by the sound of him working late. Without words, he wrapped her in a warm blanket and held her until the fears subsided. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I'll always be here." It was the first time either of them had acknowledged the depth of their bond. Michael's business associates noticed the change in him. The ruthless financial titan had softened, become more compassionate in his dealings. He began incorporating charitable initiatives into his company's mission, inspired by Emily's perspective on helping others. Board members who initially questioned his decision to take in a blind orphan now watched in amazement as both guardian and child flourished. Their relationship faced its share of challenges. Emily's occasional outbursts of frustration at her limitations tested Michael's patience, while his protective instincts sometimes threatened to stifle her independence. But they learned from each other, Emily teaching Michael to listen with his heart, while he taught her to navigate both the physical and social worlds with confidence. The mansion itself transformed under their influence. Rooms that had been pristine but cold came alive with music and laughter. The staff, who had worked in tense silence under Catherine's reign, found joy in helping Emily explore her environment. Michael had Braille labels added to everything, from doorways to kitchen containers, allowing Emily to move freely through her new home. Perhaps the most significant change was in Michael's outlook on life. The emptiness that had driven him to accumulate wealth and power began to fill with something more meaningful. Watching Emily overcome her challenges with grace and determination gave him a new purpose. He started keeping a journal of their daily victories, her first solo performance, her mastery of a difficult piece, the day she navigated the entire mansion without her cane. Their evenings often ended with Emily at the piano, playing whatever emotion filled her heart, while Michael sat nearby, paperwork forgotten as he lost himself in the music. These quiet moments, more than any words, cemented their connection. He wasn't trying to replace his lost child, and she wasn't trying to forget her past together. They were building something new, something neither had expected but both desperately needed. What Michael couldn't know was that their growing bond would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine, as the secrets Catherine kept threatened to destroy the family they had created. Catherine's hatred for Emily grew more intense with each passing day, fueled by the girl's growing bond with Michael and her flourishing musical talent. What began as subtle cruelty evolved into calculated psychological warfare. She would stand in Emily's doorway late at night, watching the sleeping child with a mixture of loathing and something deeper, a twisted recognition she refused to acknowledge. The breaking point came during a prestigious dinner party where Emily was asked to perform. The guests' enthusiastic applause and genuine admiration for the blind pianist sent Catherine into a private rage. That night, after everyone had left, she destroyed Emily's Braille music books, shredding pages while maintaining enough composure to make it look like an accident. "Oh, how unfortunate," she said the next morning. The cleaning staff must have mistaken them for waste paper. Her sabotage became more sophisticated. She began spreading subtle rumors among their social circle about Emily's unstable behavior, and concerning incidents she would orchestrate situations where Emily would appear clumsy or difficult, then express exaggerated concern to the staff and guests. "We're trying our best with her," she would sigh, "but some people simply can't be helped." Catherine's most effective weapon was her ability to strike when Emily felt most confident. After a particularly successful practice session, she would whisper just within Emily's hearing, "Talent means nothing when you're fundamentally broken." These poisonous words, delivered with precision, were designed to crack the foundation of security Michael had built. The presence of Lucas, her son, during his visits home only intensified Catherine's malice. She noticed how he watched Emily with curiosity and something close to recognition. This triggered a paranoia that drove her to more extreme measures. She began locking Emily in her room during Lucas's visits, claiming the girl was unwell and needed rest. Her campaign of cruelty reached new heights when she discovered Emily had been invited to perform at a prestigious charity event. Catherine systematically began tampering with the piano before Emily's practice sessions, slightly detuning keys to make the girl doubt her perfect pitch. The psychological impact was devastating. Emily's confidence wavered, and she began to question her own abilities. But it wasn't enough. Catherine could see that, despite everything, Emily was thriving. The girl's resilience, her ability to find joy despite the darkness, awakened something dangerous in Catherine. She began researching untraceable poisons, using her art world connections to acquire a rare, expensive medication known for its deadly properties when misused. The plan was methodically crafted. Catherine chose a night when Michael would be working late, dismissing the regular kitchen staff with generous bonuses. She prepared Emily's favorite meal herself, a gesture so out of character it should have raised suspicions. As she stirred the deadly addition into the soup, her hands were steady, her face calm. "I made this specially for you," Catherine announced, placing the bowl before Emily. "Consider it a piece." Offering her voice carried just the right note of warmth, masking the cold calculation beneath. She watched intently as Emily lifted the spoon, feeling a twisted satisfaction as the girl took her first bite. What Catherine hadn't counted on was Lucas's unexpected return home. He stood in the kitchen doorway, observing the strange scene of his mother watching Emily eat with such focused attention. Something in Catherine's expression, a mixture of anticipation and barely contained triumph, triggered his suspicions. The aftermath unfolded with frightening speed. Emily's first symptoms appeared within hours: severe cramping, difficulty breathing, confusion. Catherine played the role of concerned guardian perfectly, suggesting it must have been food poisoning from lunch at school. But her performance slipped when Michael insisted on calling an ambulance rather than letting the illness run its course as she suggested. As Emily was rushed to the hospital, Catherine maintained her composure, but inside she was seething. Her carefully planned attempt had failed, and worse, she had witnessed something that shook her to her core. Lucas's expression as he watched the paramedics wheel Emily away. In his face she saw a dawning recognition that threatened to unravel everything she had sacrificed to protect. That night, alone in her room, Catherine began plotting again. The failed poisoning attempt had only strengthened her resolve. She would find another way, a more definitive solution to remove Emily from their lives. What she didn't realize was that her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would expose the dark secrets she'd kept buried for 11 years. Richard Anderson's decade-long search for his daughter had reduced him from a prestigious attorney to a shadow of his former self. His small law office, now dedicated to helping families with disabled children, was wallpapered with age progression photos of Grace and newspaper clippings about missing children. Each morning he would touch her latest projected image before starting his day, a ritual that kept hope alive. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through one of his pro bono cases. A former orphanage worker, seeking legal help for wrongful termination, mentioned a blind girl who had escaped St. Mary's Home years ago. She was different from the others, the worker recalled. She had this way about her, like she came from somewhere better. The timing matched Grace's disappearance perfectly. Richard's investigation of St. Mary's revealed a trail of breadcrumbs. The admission records showed a blind girl dropped off during a storm, with only a first name. The description matched what he remembered of his infant daughter, but the trail went cold at her escape. He spent weeks interviewing street vendors and homeless shelter workers in the area, piecing together fragments of information about a blind girl who used to seek shelter in their doorways. A coffee shop owner remembered her clearly. She would sit outside, moving her fingers like she was playing piano, he said. Then one day, some rich fellow took her in. Everyone thought it was a miracle. The description of the rich fellow led Richard to investigate Manhattan's wealthy philanthropists, eventually connecting the dots to Michael Elias. The discovery that his daughter might be living in luxury should have brought relief, but it filled Richard with complex emotions. He spent days watching the Elias mansion from a distance, his heart breaking every time he caught glimpses of a young girl at the window. The sound of piano music floating from the house seemed to call to him, reminding him of Sarah's talent that Grace had apparently inherited. His first attempt to approach the house was thwarted by security. The second time, he managed to speak to a sympathetic maid who confirmed that the blind girl's name was Emily, not Grace, but the similarities were undeniable. The maid also shared disturbing information about Catherine's treatment of the child, awakening Richard's protective instincts. The final piece fell into place when Richard attended a charity event where Emily was scheduled to perform. Hidden in the audience, he watched his daughter play the piano with the same passionate grace her mother once possessed. The way she tilted her head, her posture at the piano, every gesture was a mirror of Sarah in her younger years. There was no doubt in his mind Emily was his Grace. Richard's legal training took over as he built a case. He gathered documentation, birth records, hospital records from Grace's birth, statements from nurses who remembered Sarah's rejection of their blind baby. He even tracked down the night watchman who had been working at the orphanage the night Grace was left there. But the most shocking discovery came when he began investigating Catherine Elias. Old photographs from her time as a promising young pianist showed an unmistakable resemblance to Sarah. Further digging revealed that Catherine and Sarah were the same person. His ex-wife had completely reinvented herself after abandoning their daughter. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't just abandoned their child, she had constructed an entirely new life, married into wealth, and now lived in the same house as the daughter she had thrown away. The cruelty of fate was staggering Grace. Now Emily was being tormented by her own mother, who appeared not to recognize her. Richard struggled with how to proceed. Direct confrontation could traumatize Emily and potentially cause Catherine Sarah to take desperate measures. Yet the reports of increasing cruelty toward Emily made him realize he couldn't wait much longer. His daughter needed protection from the very woman who had given her life. He began documenting Catherine's activities, hiring private investigators to build a case that would ensure Emily's safety. The evidence they gathered painted a disturbing picture of escalating psychological abuse and recent suspicious behavior suggesting worse intentions. As he prepared to make his move, Richard kept returning to the sound of Emily's piano playing the one clear connection he had to his daughter. Soon, he promised himself, she would know the truth. Soon she would understand that she had never been unwanted, that her father had spent every day of the past 11 years searching for her. The emergency room at Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Emily was rushed through its doors. Michael ran alongside the gurney, his usual composed demeanor shattered by fear. Emily's small hand clutched his, her unseeing eyes wide with pain and confusion. "Don't leave me," she whispered between labored breaths. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the attending physician, quickly assessed the situation. Her symptoms are unusual for standard food poisoning, she noted, watching Emily's body contort with another wave of spasms. "Mr. Elias, we need a detailed account of everything she consumed in the last 24 hours. Catherine stood in the corner of the emergency room, maintaining a perfect mask of concern while providing what appeared to be helpful information. She only had her usual meals at home, she stated smoothly. Although she did mention feeling unwell after her school lunch, her voice carried just the right note of maternal worry. Lucas, who had followed them to the hospital, watched his mother with growing suspicion. He remembered how intently she had observed Emily eating the soup, how she had insisted on preparing it herself. His hands trembled as he typed a quick message to his school friend, whose parent was a toxicologist. The first round of standard tests revealed nothing conclusive. Emily's condition continued to deteriorate, her pianist's fingers now twitching uncontrollably. Michael paced the hallway, making calls to specialists, while Catherine suggested they should prepare for the worst, with a concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. The breakthrough came when Dr. Matthews received the advanced toxicology results. Her expression changed as she read the report, immediately calling for specific counteragents. "This is no ordinary poisoning," she informed Michael privately. "The substance we found is a rare and extremely expensive medication, typically used in specialized cancer treatments. In this dose, it's lethal." Michael's world tilted on its axis. "What are you saying?" he demanded, though somewhere deep inside he already knew. The doctor's response was measured but clear. "Mr. Elias, this was no accident. Someone with significant resources and medical knowledge deliberately poisoned this child." As the medical team worked to save Emily, security cameras were reviewed and hospital police began questioning staff. Lucas stepped forward with crucial information: his mother's strange behavior, her insistence on preparing Emily's meal personally, the dismissal of their regular kitchen staff that evening. Catherine's carefully constructed facade began to crack under the mounting evidence. When confronted with the toxicology results, her expression shifted from concerned stepmother to something colder, more calculated. "You can't prove anything," she said quietly to Michael, but her eyes told a different story. The hospital corridors became a battlefield of unspoken accusations. Michael stayed by Emily's bedside, holding her hand as the antidote slowly took effect, while Catherine maintained her distance, watching from the doorway with an unreadable expression. Lucas positioned himself between them, his loyalty to his mother warring with his growing certainty of her guilt. Dr. Matthews documented everything meticulously, knowing this would become a criminal investigation. The poison's rarity meant it could be traced. Only certain suppliers handled it, all requiring extensive documentation. Every time she entered Emily's room, she noted Catherine's subtle reactions, the way she seemed to calculate rather than care. Emily's recovery was gradual but steady. As her strength returned, she began to speak of her last meal at home, of Catherine's unusual kindness, of the strange taste she had noticed but hadn't wanted to mention for fear of seeming ungrateful. Each word was another nail in Catherine's coffin of deception. The police arrived quietly, taking statements and collecting evidence. Detective James Morrison, a veteran of domestic cases, noticed something familiar about Catherine's photograph in the file. He made a call to a colleague in missing persons, setting in motion a chain of discoveries that would expose far more than just attempted murder. As Emily lay recovering, surrounded by machines monitoring her vital signs, Michael made a decision. He would no longer allow Catherine's presence in their home, regardless of social appearances or business connections. The sight of his precious Emily, fighting for her life in a hospital bed, had shattered any pretense of maintaining their perfect family image. The hospital became a convergence point for truth, where carefully constructed lies began to unravel. What no one realized was that another player was about to enter the scene, a man who had been searching for Emily longer than anyone, whose arrival would expose the darkest secret of all. The revelation began with a weathered photograph slipped under Emily's hospital room door. The image showed a young woman at a piano, her posture identical to Emily's, her face a younger version of Catherine's. The date stamp read Sarah Bennett Concert Series 2012, exactly 9 months before Emily's birth. Detective Morrison, who had been investigating the poisoning, recognized Sarah Bennett's name from an old missing persons case involving an abandoned blind baby. The pieces started falling into place as he compared Catherine's current photos with Sarah's performance records. They were undeniably the same person. Richard Anderson chose this moment to make his presence known. He arrived at the hospital carrying a file of documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, newspaper clippings, and medical records that told the story of Sarah Bennett's transformation into Catherine Elias. The evidence was irrefutable. Lucas, who had been struggling with his own suspicions, found his world shattered by the revelation. He discovered that the half-sister he had been secretly helping was actually his full sister, and the mother he thought he knew had abandoned her firstborn child only to torment her years later under a new identity. Michael confronted Catherine in the hospital corridor, away from Emily's room. "How long did you know?" he demanded. "Did you recognize her the moment I brought her home?" Catherine's response was chilling in its calculation. "I knew the moment she sat at my piano. She plays exactly like I used to, before I chose a different life." The truth poured out in a torrent of long-buried secrets. Catherine admitted that, as Sarah Bennett, she had been a promising concert pianist whose career was derailed by an unplanned pregnancy. When the baby was born blind, she saw it as a cosmic punishment for choosing motherhood over music. Her solution was to abandon both child and husband, reinventing herself as Catherine Williams before marrying Michael Elias. Hospital staff watched in stunned silence as Catherine's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her refined accent slipped, revealing traces of Sarah Bennett's original voice. The sophisticated art curator disappeared, replaced by a woman consumed by guilt, rage, and a desperate need to erase the evidence of her past mistakes. Emily, though still weak from the poisoning, could hear the commotion outside her room. The voices, the accusations, the confessions, each word painted a picture more horrifying than her blindness had ever been. The woman who had tortured her for months was the same mother who had abandoned her at birth. Lucas struggled to reconcile his memories of Catherine's seemingly perfect mothering with the monster who had tried to kill her own child. He remembered how she had always kept him away from piano lessons, how she had flinched when he showed musical inclinations. Every memory took on a new, darker meaning. Richard's presence brought another layer of complexity to the situation. His unwavering love for his daughter stood in stark contrast to Catherine's calculated cruelty. The years he had spent searching, the career he had sacrificed, the hope he had never abandoned all testified to the father's love Catherine had denied Emily. The hospital became a crucible where 11 years of lies melted away. Security guards stationed themselves outside Emily's room, not just to protect her from Catherine, but to prevent the growing number of reporters attracted by the scandalous story of the socialite who had poisoned her own, forgotten child. When Catherine finally broke down, it wasn't with remorse, but with rage. "She should never have come back into my life," she screamed at Michael. "Everything was perfect until you brought her into our home. She's a reminder of everything I worked so hard to forget." The most heartbreaking moment came when Emily, hearing her mother's words, turned her face to the wall and began to play an imaginary piano on her hospital blanket, her fingers moving to the same melody Catherine had once performed as Sarah Bennett. The similarity in their movements was unmistakable, a cruel echo of their shared blood. Detective Morrison recorded everything, building a case that would encompass not only the recent poisoning but 11 years of child abandonment, identity fraud, and psychological abuse. Each piece of evidence revealed new layers of Catherine's elaborate deception and the lengths she had gone to bury her past. The hospital's private conference room became the stage for the final confrontation, its sterile walls containing 11 years of buried truths and betrayals. Michael, Richard and Catherine sat at a triangular table, the physical arrangement reflecting their complicated connection to Emily's life. "You had everything," Michael began, his voice trembling with controlled rage. "Wealth, status, respect, yet you tried to kill your own child." His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white with tension. Catherine, still maintaining her aristocratic posture, merely raised an eyebrow. But Richard leaned forward, placing a worn photograph on the table. "Sarah Bennett's concert debut. I carried this for 11 years, he said quietly, "searching every face in every crowd, hoping to find you with our daughter. Never imagining you'd become someone else entirely." "That woman is dead," Catherine snapped, pushing the photograph away. Sarah Bennett was weak, sentimental. She let a baby destroy her future. I became someone stronger. Her voice carried the practiced refinement of Catherine Elias, but her eyes held Sarah Bennett's desperate ambition. Michael pulled out hospital records detailing Emily's poisoning. "Stronger," he scoffed. "You systematically tortured a blind child, your own flesh and blood. Tell me, Catherine, or should I say Sarah, what kind of strength is that?" The confrontation escalated as Richard revealed more evidence, documentation of Sarah's hospital stay during Emily's birth, the original birth certificate naming her as the mother, newspaper clippings about her disappearance. Each piece stripped away another layer of Catherine's carefully constructed identity. "You don't understand." Catherine's composure finally cracked. "I had dreams, ambitions. A blind child would have been an anchor, dragging me into a life of endless care and sacrifice. I made a choice to survive." Her words hung in the air, heavy with years of justification. Lucas, who had been silently observing, suddenly spoke from the doorway. "You made me complicit in torturing my own sister," his voice broke. "All those times you told me to stay away from her, to ignore her, you were protecting your lies, not me." Catherine turned to her son, reaching out, but Lucas stepped back. "Don't," he said. "Every piano lesson you denied me, every time you flinched when I showed interest in music, it was all because of her, wasn't it? Because we might have discovered the truth." The room fell silent as Catherine's carefully constructed world continued to crumble. Michael watched his wife transform before his eyes, seeing for the first time the desperate young pianist who had abandoned her baby for a chance at a different life. "I want to press charges," Richard stated firmly. "Not just for the poisoning, but for everything, the abandonment, the fraud, the years of psychological abuse." He turned to Michael. "Will you support this?" Michael nodded slowly, his mind on Emily in her hospital bed. "She needs to be protected. From you," he addressed Catherine directly. "Your presence in her life has been nothing but poison, literally and figuratively." Catherine's laugh was hollow. echoing against the sterile walls. Protected? I gave her life. Everything I did was to protect myself from that mistake. You think I didn't recognize her the moment you brought her home? Her movements, her music, she's everything I tried to escape. The tension peaked as Catherine stood, her designer dress rustling with the movement. You want the truth? Here it is. I didn't just abandon her, I paid someone to make sure she would never be found. The orphanage, the streets, it was all arranged. I needed to ensure my new life would be safe from my past. The admission stunned the room into silence. Michael's face drained of color as he realized the full extent of her calculation. Richard's hands clenched into fists, years of searching taking on an even more painful context. You're a monster, Lucas whispered, his voice breaking. Not because you gave her up, but because you found her again and still tried to destroy her. As if on cue, the sound of piano music drifted from Emily's room down the hall, a haunting melody that shared the same artistic flourishes Catherine had once been famous for. The music seemed to physically affect Catherine, making her flinch as if struck. She's everything you could have been, Richard said quietly. Everything you threw away in your pursuit of perfection. And now you'll lose everything anyway. Security guards appeared at the door, summoned by Detective Morrison. Catherine looked at each face in the room, her husband, her son, her former life before straightening her spine and adopting the cold mask she had perfected over years. You can't erase me, she said as the guards approached. I'm in her music, in her blood. Every note she plays will remind you of me. As Catherine was led away, Michael and Richard exchanged glances, united in their determination to protect Emily from the woman who had twice tried to destroy her, first through abandonment and then through calculated malice. The truth hit Emily like a physical blow as she lay in her hospital bed, the machines beeping steadily around her. Through the thin walls, she had heard every word of the confrontation, each revelation cutting deeper than the poison that had brought her there. Her fingers, which had been absently playing an imaginary piano, suddenly froze mid-motion. She's my mother, Emily whispered into the darkness, tasting the bitter irony of the words. The woman who had tormented her, who had tried to break her spirit daily, was the same one who had first abandoned her. The realization sent tremors through her body that had nothing to do with her recent poisoning. But Michael found her like this, curled into herself, her unseeing eyes wide with unshed tears. Emily, he said softly, reaching for her hand. For the first time since he'd rescued her from the streets, she pulled away from his touch. Did you know, she asked, her voice barely audible. Did anyone know what she was doing to me? The memories came flooding back with new context, every cruel word, every accidental push, every sabotaged piano practice. Each incident now carried the weight of maternal rejection twice over. Emily's body began to shake uncontrollably, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through her carefully constructed walls. I pretended, she gasped between sobs, that my real mother must have had a good reason. That she must have loved me but couldn't keep me. But she found me again just to hurt me more. The words came out in broken fragments, each one tearing at her throat like glass. Lucas entered the room, drawn by the sound of his sister's distress. Emily, he started, but she cut him off. Did you know, she demanded again, her voice rising. All those times you helped me, did you know I was your sister? The pain in her question made him flinch. The breakdown escalated as Emily tried to process 11 years of abandonment culminating in attempted murder. She struck out at the medical equipment surrounding her bed, her pianist's hands curled into desperate fists. Why wasn't I enough, she screamed, her voice raw with anguish. Why did she hate me so much? Richard, standing in the doorway, felt each of his daughter's cries like a knife to his heart. He had searched for her for so long, only to find her in pieces. Grace, he said, using her birth name for the first time, but Emily covered her ears. I'm not Grace, she sobbed. Grace was wanted. Grace had a father who looked for her. I'm just Emily, the blind girl nobody wanted. The medical staff rushed in as Emily's vital signs spiked dangerously. Her emotional distress was threatening her already weakened system. Through her tears, she began to play her mother's signature piece on her hospital blanket, her fingers moving with the same grace that had marked Catherine's performances years ago. "I can feel her in my music," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Every time I play, every movement is her. I want it out. I want it out. I want her out of me." Her fingers kept moving though, unable to stop the melody that flowed through her blood. Michael tried to comfort her, but Emily was lost in her pain. "You brought me into her house," she said, the accusation clear in her voice. "You put me right in front of her, and she tried to destroy me all over again." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with betrayal. Hours passed as Emily cycled through waves of grief, rage, and devastating sadness. She refused food, turned away from comfort, and kept repeating, "She should have just left me on the streets. At least there I only had to fight strangers." The night deepened, but Emily couldn't find peace. Her fingers continued their restless movement, playing phantom melodies that now felt like chains binding her to Catherine. Each note was a reminder of the blood they shared, the talent that had marked her as her mother's daughter even before anyone knew the truth. Dawn found her exhausted but unable to rest, her unseeing eyes red from tears she couldn't stop shedding. The truth had shattered not just her present, but her past and future as well. Every memory needed to be re-examined, every moment of cruelty given new, more painful context. Despite being under investigation, Catherine managed to post bail through her extensive connections. The night she was released, a violent storm hit Manhattan, reminiscent of the night she had first abandoned Emily. She waited until visiting hours ended, knowing the hospital's security shift change would create a brief window of vulnerability. Dressed in a nurse's uniform stolen from the hospital's laundry, Catherine slipped through the quiet corridors. Her designer heels had been replaced with silent rubber soles, her signature perfume washed away. Years of creating a new identity had taught her the art of transformation. But Emily was alone in her room, her fingers moving restlessly in her sleep. Catherine stood in the doorway, watching her daughter's unconscious mimicry of her own musical gestures. Rage and recognition warred in her heart. This child was both her greatest shame and her perfect mirror. "Wake up," Catherine whispered, her voice carrying the soft authority of a nurse. Emily stirred, her unseeing eyes opening. Before she could cry out, Catherine pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth to her face. This time she murmured, "I'll make sure you disappear completely." As Catherine wheeled Emily's unconscious form toward the service elevator, Lucas appeared from around the corner. He had been watching his mother's townhouse, suspecting she might attempt something desperate. "Stop," he called out, reaching for his phone. Catherine's response was swift. She pulled a small revolver from her pocket. "My own son," she said, her voice bitter. "Betraying me for a sister you never knew existed." Lucas stood his ground, though his hands trembled. "You betrayed us both first," he replied, slowly backing toward the emergency alarm. The commotion attracted a night nurse, who froze at the sight of the gun. Catherine used the moment to push Emily's wheelchair into the service elevator, holding the weapon steady. "Nobody follows," she commanded, her society accent slipping into something harder, more desperate. Michael and Richard, returning from a late dinner discussion about Emily's future, arrived to find the hospital in chaos. Security cameras had caught Catherine's entry, but lost her in a blind spot. The storm had knocked out power to several external cameras, leaving them blind to her escape route. In the parking garage, Catherine struggled to transfer Emily's limp form into a waiting car. The girl was smaller than average for her age. Years of neglect had stunted her growth, but dead weight was still difficult to manage. But as Catherine fumbled with the car door, Emily began to stir. Recognition dawned in Emily's face as the chloroform wore off. "Mother," she whispered, the word carrying 11 years of pain. Catherine flinched but didn't stop her efforts. "Don't call me that," she snapped. "I'm not your mother. I'm nobody's mother anymore." Emily, still weak from the poisoning, found strength in her terror. She began to play her mother's signature piece, her fingers moving in the air between them. The familiar melody seemed to freeze Catherine in place. "Stop," that she hissed, but Emily continued, each note a reminder of their unbreakable connection. Lucas had triggered the hospital's lockdown system and was now leading security to the garage. Rain poured through the open levels, making the concrete treacherous. Catherine heard the approaching footsteps and grew more frantic, trying to force Emily into the car. "You can't erase me," Emily said, her voice stronger now. "Every time you hear piano music, you'll know I exist. I'm the truth you can't kill." The words struck Catherine like physical blows, making her grip on the gun waver. Security arrived at one entrance while Michael and Richard appeared at another, trapping Catherine between them. She pulled Emily against her, using her as a shield, the gun pressed to her daughter's temple. "Stay back," she warned, but her society mask had crumbled completely, revealing the desperate woman beneath. Emily, feeling the gun's cold metal against her skin, continued to move her fingers in that haunting melody. The sound seemed to echo in the garage, though no piano was present. Catherine's hand began to shake as the musical pattern forced memories of her own past to surface. "I gave you this gift," Catherine whispered, her voice breaking. "This curse. Every time you play, you prove your mind." Emily turned her unseeing eyes toward her mother's face. "No," she replied softly. "Every time I play, I prove I survived you." The standoff stretched taut as the storm raged outside. Catherine's carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and she knew it. The gun trembled in her hand as she faced the impossible choice between surrender and an unthinkable final act of destruction. In a sudden burst of desperation, Catherine dragged Emily toward the garage's emergency stairwell. The rain made the concrete slick, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. "If I can't erase you," Catherine snarled, "I'll make sure no one else has you either." Richard was the first to react, his paternal instincts overriding caution. He sprinted toward them, with Michael and Lucas close behind. Security guards spread out, trying to cut off potential escape routes. The garage became a maze of shadows and rain, with Emily's life hanging in the balance. Catherine, still gripping Emily with one arm and the gun with her other hand, began climbing the stairs. Each step was treacherous, made worse by Emily's passive resistance. The girl's fingers never stopped moving, playing that haunting melody that seemed to follow them upward. "Stop that music," Catherine screamed, her composure completely shattered. The society accent was gone, replaced by Sarah Bennett's original voice. "I left that life behind. I won't let you bring it back." Her grip on Emily tightened painfully. Richard and Michael coordinated silently, taking different routes up the garage levels. Lucas, knowing his mother's patterns, predicted she was heading for the roof where she likely had another escape planned. He took a service elevator, hoping to cut them off. The chase continued upward, floor by floor. Catherine's high society strength was failing her, unused to such physical exertion. Emily, despite her weakness, remained eerily calm, her unseeing eyes focused inward as she continued her silent performance. Rain poured through the open sections of the garage, making visibility poor. Security lights cast strange shadows, creating a surreal atmosphere. Catherine's breathing became ragged as she pushed through her exhaustion, dragging Emily ever upward. On the 10th floor, Lucas emerged from the service elevator directly in their path. "Mother," he called out, his voice steady despite his fear. "Look at what you've become. Look at what you're doing to your own daughter." Catherine's response was to fire a warning shot that echoed deafeningly in the concrete structure. The sound made Emily flinch, but her fingers never stopped their ghostly performance. The melody seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. Richard appeared behind them, while Michael blocked the downward escape route. Catherine backed toward the garage's edge, still using Emily as a shield. The storm raged around them, wind whipping their clothes and making every movement dangerous. "It ends tonight," Catherine declared, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Everything I built, everything I became, I won't let her destroy it all." She edged closer to the precipice, pulling Emily with her. In that crucial moment, Emily spoke. Her voice carried the same musical quality as her phantom playing. "I forgive you," she said softly. "Not for me, but for yourself. You've lived with this hatred for so long, Mother. Let it end." The words seemed to pierce Catherine's defenses. Her hand holding the gun began to shake violently. The perfectionist mask cracked completely, revealing the tormented woman beneath. For a brief moment, Sarah Bennett's face emerged from Catherine Elias's carefully constructed facade. Lucas seized this moment of vulnerability to lunge forward, while Richard rushed from behind. Catherine, caught off guard, lost her grip on Emily. The gun clattered to the ground as Lucas tackled his mother away from the edge. Richard caught Emily as she stumbled, pulling her close for the first time in 11 years. The moment was both reunion and rescue, his tears mixing with the rain as he held his daughter. "I never stopped looking for you," he whispered. "Never." Catherine fought against Lucas's restraining hold, her screams becoming incoherent. Security guards converged on their position, this time with proper restraints. As they led her away, her eyes remained fixed on Emily, reflecting a mixture of hatred and something deeper recognition of what she had thrown away. Emily, still in her father's arms, finally stopped her phantom playing. The silence that followed seemed louder than the storm. Michael approached cautiously, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder, completing the circle of protection she had needed all along. The night's drama ended as it had begun, with a storm, a mother's rejection, and a daughter's survival. But this time Emily wasn't alone. She had found her true family in the midst of chaos, stronger than blood, built on love rather than obligation. The investigation into Catherine Elias unraveled like a carefully woven tapestry, each thread revealing new horrors. Detective Morrison's team discovered a hidden safe in her private gallery office, containing documents that painted a disturbing picture of calculated manipulation spanning over a decade. The first revelation came from financial records showing payments to the man who had kidnapped Emily from her father's care 11 years ago. Bank statements revealed regular deposits to an offshore account, ensuring the kidnapper's silence. The man was finally tracked down in Miami, where he confessed to the entire scheme, including Catherine's specific instructions to place the child in the worst possible orphanage. Medical records under the name Sarah Bennett exposed another layer of deception. Before Emily's birth, Catherine had attempted to terminate the pregnancy multiple times, stopped only by legal restrictions. The doctor's notes described her increasing desperation and eventual disappearance from prenatal care, only to return for the delivery. Hospital staff from 11 years ago came forward with their memories. A nurse recalled how Sarah Catherine had refused to hold her newborn daughter, turning away when told the child was blind. Another remembered finding torn-up suicide notes in her hospital room, filled with references to her ruined career and the burden she couldn't bear. The transformation from Sarah Bennett to Catherine Elias was meticulously documented in the safe's contents. Receipts for plastic surgery, voice coaching sessions, and extensive documentation forging a new identity revealed the extent of her determination to erase her past. She had even hired a professional to create a false background, complete with manufactured childhood photos and school records. More disturbing were the detailed notes Catherine had kept about Emily since Michael brought her home. Page after page documented her deliberate psychological warfare plans to undermine the child's confidence, strategies to isolate her, and eventually research into untraceable poisons. Lucas provided crucial evidence from his own observations, including recordings he'd secretly made of his mother's cruel treatment of Emily. His testimony revealed patterns of abuse that had been carefully hidden from Michael and the household staff. He also exposed Catherine's systematic firing of any servant who showed kindness to Emily. The art world, Catherine's carefully cultivated domain, provided its own revelations. Colleagues came forward with stories of her obsessive avoidance of music, her violent reactions to piano performances, and her mysterious absences around the time of Emily's birth. One gallery owner remembered Catherine's hysterical response to a blind musician performing at an opening, now understood in a new context. Financial investigations revealed that Catherine had been embezzling from Michael's charitable foundation, specifically targeting funds meant for programs helping disabled children. She had redirected millions to ensure her elaborate scheme remained hidden, using the money to pay off potential witnesses and maintain her false identity. The most damning evidence came from Catherine's personal diary, discovered hidden in a false bottom of her jewelry box. The entries revealed not just her actions, but the cold calculation behind them. She had recognized Emily the moment Michael brought her home, seeing her as both a threat to her new life and an opportunity for revenge against the fate that had cursed her with a blind child. Detective Morrison compiled all this evidence into a devastating case file. The charges mounted child abandonment, identity fraud, kidnapping, embezzlement, attempted murder, and dozens of lesser crimes. Each page added weight to the prosecution's case, transforming Catherine from Manhattan socialite to calculating criminal. Media coverage was explosive. Newspapers that had once featured Catherine's charity work now ran headlines about her double life. Society columns that had praised her refined taste now detailed her methodical cruelty. The story captured public attention not just for its sensational elements, but for its profound questions about motherhood, identity, and the price of ambition. As the evidence mounted, Catherine's remaining supporters in high society quickly distanced themselves. The carefully constructed world of Catherine Elias crumbled, revealing the desperate, destructive Sarah Bennett beneath. Her prestigious board positions were withdrawn, gallery partnerships dissolved, and social invitations evaporated. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most poetic, a video of Emily playing piano at her first recital in the mansion, alongside a recording of Sarah Bennett's last public performance. The identical movements, the same artistic flourishes, proved beyond doubt that the talent Catherine had tried to destroy in her daughter was the very gift she had passed on. The DNA test results lay unopened on Lucas's desk for 3 days. Though he had secretly taken samples from both himself and Emily during her hospital stay, the reality of what those results might confirm terrified him. The similarities in their musical inclinations, the shared mannerisms, and his mother's peculiar behavior had already painted a clear picture, but seeing scientific proof would make it undeniable. Finally, alone in his room at boarding school, Lucas opened the envelope. The clinical language confirmed what his heart had already known: Emily wasn't just someone he had helped protect, she was his full sister. The report showed a 99.9% sibling match, along with additional markers indicating they shared both parents. Memories flooded back with new meaning. Every time his mother had prevented him from taking piano lessons, despite his natural talent, the way she would flinch when he hummed familiar melodies, her obsessive control over his activities whenever Emily was near. It hadn't been mere cruelty, it had been fear of discovery. Lucas began to piece together a timeline. He was born exactly 2 years after Emily's abandonment, suggesting his mother had immediately tried to replace her failed first attempt at motherhood. While Emily suffered in orphanages and on the streets, he had been raised in luxury, groomed to be the perfect society child. He found himself revisiting every interaction with Emily since her arrival at the mansion. The instinctive need to protect her, which he had attributed to basic humanity, now revealed itself as something deeper, a blood bond he had sensed but couldn't name. His secret acts of kindness had been more than charity, they were attempts to repair a broken family tie. The revelation sent Lucas into a spiral of guilt. While he had enjoyed premium education, designer clothes, and every advantage money could buy, his sister had been surviving on scraps, navigating darkness both literal and metaphorical. The contrast in their lives was a testament to their mother's calculated cruelty. Unable to contain his emotions, Lucas sought out Emily at the hospital. He found her in the music room, her fingers dancing across the piano keys in a melody that mirrored his own musical inclinations. "I'm your brother," he blurted out, his voice cracking. "Your full brother. We share both parents." Emily's fingers stilled on the keys. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Then, slowly, she patted the piano bench beside her. "I know," she said softly. "I've always known. Music speaks louder than words, and your heart plays the same melody as mine." The siblings sat together at the piano, their fingers finding harmonies that seemed written in their shared DNA. Lucas taught Emily pieces their mother had played in her Sarah Bennett days, while Emily showed him how to feel the music beyond the notes. Their duets became a language of healing, a way to reclaim what Catherine had tried to destroy. Watching them from the doorway, Michael and Richard saw the undeniable physical resemblances they had somehow missed before. The same graceful hands, the identical tilt of the head when concentrating, the shared musical intuition that went beyond learned skill. Lucas's discovery led to a deeper investigation of his own life. He found that his birth certificate had been altered, his early medical records carefully sanitized of any reference to family history. Catherine had literally rewritten history to hide her connection to Emily, creating a perfect narrative for her second chance at motherhood. The truth transformed Lucas's understanding of himself. He was not, as he had believed, the cherished only child of Catherine Elias. He was the replacement child, the second attempt, raised in the shadow of his mother's greatest shame. Yet in finding Emily, he had also found a part of himself that Catherine had tried to suppress, his true musical heritage. As the siblings navigated their new relationship, Lucas found himself sharing stories of their mother's earlier years, helping Emily understand the woman who had both created and tried to destroy her. These conversations were painful but necessary, each revelation bringing them closer while helping them process their shared trauma. The DNA results became both a burden and a blessing, proof of their connection, but also evidence of their mother's elaborate deception. Lucas chose to submit the findings to Detective Morrison, knowing they would strengthen the case against Catherine while legally establishing Emily's true identity. The Manhattan Criminal Court buzzed with tension on the morning of Catherine Elias's trial. The case had captured national attention, drawing media from across the country to witness the downfall of one of society's most prominent figures. Inside the courtroom, Catherine sat perfectly poised in designer clothing, still playing the role of sophisticated socialite even in handcuffs. District Attorney Sarah Reynolds opened the prosecution with devastating precision. "Your Honor, we stand here today to expose not just a single crime, but a decade-long campaign of calculated cruelty that began with the abandonment of a blind infant and culminated in an attempt to murder that same child." The evidence unfolded like a dark symphony. Medical records showed Catherine's initial rejection of Emily, followed by documentation of her elaborate identity change from Sarah Bennett to Catherine Elias. Financial records revealed payments to the kidnapper, while hospital reports detailed the recent poisoning attempt. Emily's testimony was the emotional center of the trial. She sat at the witness stand, her unseeing eyes directed toward the sound of her mother's breathing. With quiet dignity, she recounted years of abuse, her voice never wavering as she described Catherine's systematic attempts to break her spirit. The worst part wasn't the cruelty, Emily testified. It was feeling her watch me suffer, knowing now that she watched with recognition, not just hatred. Every time I played piano, she heard herself in my music, and it made her want to destroy me even more. Lucas's testimony followed, providing the missing pieces of Catherine's double life. He described how his mother had carefully constructed a new identity, using his upbringing as a shield to hide her past. His revelation of their DNA match drew audible gasps from the courtroom. Richard Anderson took the stand next, his years of searching documented in meticulous detail. Private investigator reports, police statements, and countless hours of searching were laid bare, showing the devastation Catherine had wrought not just on Emily, but on all those who loved her. Michael's testimony revealed the elaborate deception that had fooled him for years. He described watching his wife torment a child he had brought home out of compassion, never suspecting she was orchestrating a complex revenge against her own past. Catherine's facade finally cracked during cross-examination. When confronted with Emily's early baby photos alongside Lucas's showing their unmistakable resemblance, she exploded. "I had the right to choose my life," she screamed, her cultivated accent slipping. "That blind child would have destroyed everything I worked for." The defense tried to paint Catherine as a victim of postpartum depression and societal pressure, but the evidence of long-term calculation destroyed any sympathy this might have garnered. Records of her careful planning, from identity change to poison purchase, showed clear premeditation. The jury deliberation was surprisingly brief. As the verdict was read guilty on all counts, Catherine maintained her rigid posture, but her hands trembled visibly. The judge's sentencing speech was scathing, addressing not just the legal violations but the moral bankruptcy of her actions. "Mrs. Elias, or MS? Bennett. The judge declared you have demonstrated not just criminal intent but a profound failure of humanity. Your actions show a calculated cruelty that this court finds particularly abhorrent. I sentence you to the maximum term allowable, 30 years without possibility of parole." As Catherine was led away, Emily played a quiet melody on her fingers, the same piece that had haunted their confrontations. The sound seemed to follow Catherine out of the courtroom, a final reminder of the talent she had tried to deny in both herself and her daughter. The aftermath brought a different kind of justice. Emily's true identity was legally restored, though she chose to keep the name she had made her own. The court ordered Catherine to surrender all assets gained through her fraudulent identity, with the funds allocated to a trust for programs supporting disabled children. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Emily about justice and forgiveness. Her response captured the essence of her spirit. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth. Today, the truth won, and that's enough. Carnegie Hall glowed with anticipation on the evening of Emily's debut charity concert. The historic venue, which had once hosted Sarah Bennett's performances, was now filled to capacity for her daughter's first major public appearance. The proceeds would establish a foundation supporting blind and disabled children in the arts. Emily sat backstage, her fingers moving through warm-up exercises as she absorbed the energy of the gathering crowd. Her concert dress, a deep blue gown chosen by Lucas, rustled softly with each movement. 3 pianos waited on stage, one for her, one for Lucas, and one for their special guest, Richard Anderson, marking the first time father and children would perform together. "The hall's nearly full," Michael reported, his voice carrying the pride of a second father. "Every major arts patron in New York is here." He didn't mention that many had come as much for the scandal as for the music. Curious to see Catherine Elias's abandoned daughter perform. The program was carefully chosen to tell Emily's story through music. It would begin with the piece she had first played on Michael's piano, continue through works that had sustained her through Catherine's cruelty, and culminate in an original composition written with Lucas, a duet that spoke of survival and healing. In the front row sat children from various schools for the blind, each given free tickets and a chance to meet Emily after the show. Their presence transformed the evening from a simple concert into a statement about possibility and resilience. Among them was a young girl from St. Mary's Home, sitting in the same seat where Catherine had once watched her own performances. As the lights dimmed, Emily took her father's arm and walked onto the stage. The audience's applause was tentative at first, then swelled as they witnessed her confident movement to the piano. Without hesitation, her fingers found the keys, and the first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the hall. The music transformed Emily. Gone was any trace of the abandoned child or abuse survivor. In her place sat an artist in complete command of her gift. Her playing carried both technical brilliance and emotional depth, each piece telling part of her journey from darkness to light. When Lucas joined her for their duet, the similarity in their styles was striking. Their shared musical heritage, once a source of pain, became a celebration of connection. The piece they had written together spoke of loss and discovery, weaving themes of separation and reunion into a complex harmony. The concert's emotional peak came during the final number. Richard joined his children on stage for a 3-piano arrangement of the melody Emily had played during her confrontations with Catherine. This time, the music carried no bitterness. Instead, it spoke of healing and the triumph of love over hatred. As the last notes faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. Emily stood between her father and brother, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the wave of acceptance and appreciation washing over her. This moment was more than a musical success, it was a declaration of victory over everything Catherine had tried to destroy. Backstage, after the performance, Emily met with the young students. Her words to them were simple but powerful: music lives in darkness as much as in light. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. Each child was given a scholarship application for music lessons, funded by the concert's proceeds. The evening ended with a private gathering where Emily, Lucas and Richard played informally for close friends and family. Their music filled Michael's mansion, once a place of hidden cruelty, now transformed into a home of healing and hope. The same walls that had witnessed Catherine's abuse now resonated with the sound of family bonds reconstructed through art. The process of healing began in Michael's mansion, now transformed into a true home. The room that had once been Emily's prison became a music studio, filled with sunlight and the constant sound of 3 pianos: Emily's, Lucas's, and one for Richard when he visited. The space that had witnessed so much pain now echoed with the harmony of family bonds being rebuilt. Richard moved into the guest house on the property, unwilling to be far from the daughter he'd spent 11 years searching for. Each morning began with father and daughter sharing breakfast, making up for lost time through small, ordinary moments. He learned how she took her tea, the way she navigated space, the small gestures that made her uniquely Emily. Lucas split his time between boarding school and home, his weekends now filled with music and laughter rather than his mother's rigid expectations. He and Emily developed a secret language of musical phrases, often communicating through melody what words couldn't express. Their duets became conversations, each note healing another piece of their shared past. Michael found his role evolving from savior to co-parent, working with Richard to create a stable environment for both children. The two men, once potential rivals for Emily's affection, developed a deep friendship based on their shared commitment to her well-being. Their different perspectives, Richard's emotional connection and Michael's practical support, complemented each other perfectly. Family dinners became a nightly ritual, with all 4 gathered around the table sharing stories and plans. Emily delighted in having both her fathers and brother present, learning to distinguish them by their footsteps, their breathing patterns, the unique ways they move through space. The formal dining room, once a site of Catherine's subtle torments, filled with genuine warmth and conversation. The household staff, freed from Catherine's oppressive presence, became part of the extended family. The cook taught Emily to identify spices by smell, while the gardener described flowers through touch and fragrance. Even the security team, hired after Catherine's attempts, integrated smoothly into their daily lives, their protective presence more comforting than constraining. Holidays, once marked by Catherine's perfectionist demands, transformed into joyful celebrations. Thanksgiving found all 3 pianists performing impromptu concerts in the living room. Christmas brought Richard's parents, Emily's grandparents, who had never stopped hoping to meet their granddaughter. Their tears upon hearing her play their family's antique piano spoke volumes about generational healing. Lucas struggled initially with guilt over his privileged upbringing compared to Emily's suffering, but she helped him understand that their different experiences made their bond stronger. Together, they began using their musical talents to help other children, teaching at local community centers and organizing benefit concerts. The mansion's renovation reflected their healing process. Catherine's austere decorating choices gave way to comfortable furniture chosen for touch rather than appearance. Braille labels appeared on everything from door frames to kitchen cabinets. The formal sitting room became a casual gathering space where anyone could play the piano at any hour. Richard and Michael collaborated on legal matters, ensuring both Emily and Lucas's futures were secure. They established trust funds, updated wills, and created a legal framework that recognized their unique family structure. The paperwork formally acknowledged what their hearts already knew: they were all family, regardless of blood or circumstance. Emily's nightmares about her time on the streets and at the orphanage gradually decreased, replaced by dreams of music and family. When they did occur, she no longer faced them alone. Either Richard or Michael would sit with her, often joined by Lucas, until the darkness passed. These moments of vulnerability strengthened their bonds rather than exposing weakness. The healing wasn't always smooth. There were difficult conversations about the past, moments of anger and grief, times when the weight of what had been lost felt overwhelming. But they faced these challenges together, using their music to express what words couldn't contain. Even their arguments often ended at the piano, with reconciliation found in shared melodies. 5 years after Catherine's conviction, the Emily Anderson Foundation for Arts and Disability became a beacon of hope in New York City. Located in a renovated brownstone near Central Park, the foundation transformed the lives of countless abandoned and disabled children through music, art, and unconditional support. The building itself was a testament to accessibility and inclusion. Every space was designed to be navigated by touch, with textured walls telling stories through fingers and music rooms equipped with instruments modified for various disabilities. The piano where Emily first discovered her gift occupied a place of honor in the main hall, its keys worn smooth by countless young hands finding their own music. Emily's office, filled with Braille books and adaptive technology, became a sanctuary for children facing challenges similar to her own. She spent hours with each new arrival, sharing her story not as a tragedy, but as proof that darkness could lead to light. "Your difference is your strength," she would tell them, her words carrying the weight of lived experience. Lucas, now a renowned pianist in his own right, dedicated his weekends to teaching at the foundation. His students included children from St. Mary's Home, where Emily had once suffered. The orphanage, under pressure from public exposure of past abuse, had undergone complete reform and now partnered with the foundation to ensure no child felt unwanted or unloved. Richard and Michael served as co-chairs of the foundation's board, their complementary skills ensuring both its emotional mission and financial stability. Richard's legal expertise protected the children's rights, while Michael's business acumen kept the foundation growing. Together, they created a model that other cities began to emulate. The foundation's flagship program, Music in Darkness, paired visually impaired children with professional musicians for mentorship. Many of these mentors were themselves disabled artists who had found their voice through the foundation. Their concerts, featuring musicians with various disabilities, regularly sold out prestigious venues. Emily's annual benefit concert became New York's most anticipated musical event. Each year, she shared the stage with students from the foundation, proving that disability was no barrier to artistic excellence. The sight of blind children playing complex duets, deaf dancers interpreting music through vibration, and physically challenged artists creating beautiful works inspired audiences to rethink their assumptions about disability. The foundation's reach extended beyond the arts. Its advocacy program, led by Richard, fought for better accessibility laws and educational opportunities for disabled children. Their legal team provided free representation to families fighting discrimination, while their educational consultants helped schools develop inclusive programs. Perhaps most significantly, the foundation became a family for those who had none. Holiday celebrations filled the brownstone with music and laughter as current and former students gathered to share their achievements and support each other. The staff, many of whom had overcome their own challenges, created an atmosphere of understanding and acceptance. Catherine's conviction had resulted in substantial financial restitution, which Emily directed entirely to the foundation. The money that had once supported a life built on lies now funded scholarships, medical assistance, and living support for children who might otherwise fall through society's cracks. On the foundation's 5th anniversary, Emily stood before a gathered crowd, her presence commanding despite her small stature. "We are not defined by our limitations," she declared, "but by our determination to transform them into possibilities." But behind her, a choir of visually impaired children began to sing, their voices rising in perfect harmony. The foundation became living proof that family transcends blood ties. Within its walls, abandoned children found belonging, disabled artists discovered their voice, and countless lives were redirected from despair to hope. Emily's journey from rejected child to inspirational leader demonstrated the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As Emily sat at her piano that evening, surrounded by her extended family of blood and choice, she played the melody that had once haunted her confrontations with Catherine. But now, transformed by time and healing, it sang of triumph rather than pain, of love overcoming hatred, of light penetrating even the deepest darkness. The Emily Anderson Foundation stood as a testament to the truth that every child, regardless of ability or circumstance, deserves the chance to find their music in the world. If you enjoyed this emotional story of love, forgiveness, and triumph over adversity, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective and experiences matter to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. By subscribing, you support our team's dedication to bringing you meaningful content. Share this video with friends and family who might find hope and inspiration in Emily's journey. Every share helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories of resilience and unconditional love. If this story moved you, please hit the like button below. Your support encourages us to continue creating content that explores the depths of human emotion and the power of redemption. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.